The Ho Chi Minh Trail is a fascinating study of the development of American Special Forces. However, that is not the subject of this presentation. I'm going to look at what is basically the antithesis of special operations, which is what we refer to as a public bureaucracy. Anyone who reads anything about the Vietnam War has probably heard nothing but endless talk of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And yet, this is despite or because of the special forces. So we don't really care about that per se. But what's interesting is to compare the Ho Chi Minh Trail to, say, like the Oregon Trail or some of the other settler trails or the Mongol invasion. Look at this idea that a vast wave of like human migration um, is probably the best way to put this. That these waves of human migration can actually wash out any and all bits of special operations. I should at least mention that these ideas of mine of conventional superiority have sort of evolved based on my reading of Admiral McRaven's book on special operations, where his case studies essentially fall into two different categories. It's either a raid for destruction of material, or a target, or a hostage rescue, and there's not much else in there. It's sort of basically the indication that we're talking about. This is the actions of a David to take down a Goliath of a problem. And then we're going to show some Goliaths that special forces seems unable to slay or unwilling. So, what is conventional superiority? This is almost the counterpoint to relative superiority. So relative superiority. It's a condition that exists when a polity or polities, as in the case of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, maintains a program of administration designed to accomplish a political objective within the public of its extent. Sort of like a law of the land kind of situation. And there's some interesting historical parallels, which I'll point out as case studies a couple slides later. But it's a public bureaucracy. And the general idea of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the ratio of, say, special forces to logistical personnel on the trail at its peak was about 15 to 1. So this gives us a rough idea of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with very accomplished individuals, but there are very few of them relative to a larger bunch of uh, other people who just fall within some sort of administrative bounds. And of course, if anybody reads the Small Wars Journal, or at least what I remember back when I first joined the Army and reading about the Small Wars Journal, everybody, it seemed like every article that I would read would be some special forces individual complaining about bureaucracy. That is my overriding memory of the Small Wars Journal, what bits I was able to read while I was on active duty. And that's also kind of played into my ideas here. So if we were to turn to Wikipedia, the images sort of speak for themselves that the Ho Chi Minh Trail was something of the Red Ball Express for Vietnam. That's certainly what it turned into because it was a matter of how much tonnage could they get down the road uh, to wherever they needed to get that tonnage to. And that's exactly what the Red Ball Express was. And then, of course, this then raises other questions about like Anzio and Monte Cassino and all these other or even the Soviets in their evacuation uh, of all their factories in 1941. All of these sort of fall within the bounds of what I'm calling conventional superiority. It's a mystery to me, given that many of the advisors in the Kennedy administration had World War II experience, and some of them in the special operations side. And given how everybody in government should have a pretty decent read on what the SOE did in World War II, why they couldn't see that they were on the other side of the problem here, and that they were going to have to deal with some sort of uh, issue similar, but then their politics were obviously vastly different. Um, at least Colonel Lansdale should have known better. I mean, we could probably talk about Sullivan and some of the other, Ambassador Sullivan being a stick in the mud and how that relates to the Tier 1 units now. but why didn't Colonel Lansdale know better? So here's my thesis for it. Basically, whenever you hear anybody talk about a quote gray zone of conflict, which seems to be all the rage right now, when it comes to position papers related to national security, they're really referring to this administration or bureaucracy that falls outside of certain political bounds. That for whatever reason, it's in another country and they're not cooperating with us, but they have outlaws that we would very much like to deal with. Um, there's all sorts of any of these gray zones represent this sort of administration, kind of like the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In fact, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was itself sort of the first gray zone. Um, and so this sort of administrative bureaucracy, which is hated by the SF, is sort of a fortification unto itself. And we can kind of think of this as a masked Goliath. And I think you can all sort of see the imagery there and how that relates to how I'm relating those. But keep these in mind that the first gray zone is the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So here are the 8 general examples of, I don't know, the 10 or 12 that I think I've been doing most of my reading on over the past 3 or 4 years. Um, Looking at the Dane Law, and we all look at different aspects of this whole conventional superiority, and they're not really one to one. But I think each of these cases gives us some interesting look into what this idea of convention means to a conflict. So the Dane Law, the Crusader states, obviously the Mughal invasions, which would also include the first one, and then at the Indian Wars, and obviously my service with the Second Cavalry uh, sort of feeds into my understanding here too. That would be a great way of how the early dragoon units were used in America. And then obviously this, I've already mentioned the Soviet evacuations, the Red Ball Express, but this is these would be the case studies. So here's the concluding observation. Vastly inferior troops within an effective administrative apparatus can and will outlast all special force moments of relative superiority. It's just a matter of where those fit into political priorities. So the strategy must be tailored to which fits with which. Um, so if you made it this far, comment 1066 and leave me a message saying you finished. I hope this was useful.